Subjects by Scale the Summit. I can't think of something fun to put at the beginning of every video, so I'm just diving right into this one. So Scale the Summit is a US progressive technical metal band. They got their starts in the later 2000s with Monument. I really didn't get into them until The Migration back in 2013, and then since then have just really been looking forward to each of their subsequent albums. V was okay. But I honestly loved In a World of Fear, the album that came out in 2017. I love their unique take of this very popular style of technical progressive metal, where it's not just genty drops all the time. It's not just technical wankery the entire time. They have some really interesting catchy hooks, but more so than that is their emotion that they have as their driving force for a lot of these tracks. Yes, they do have a lot of those technical, really juicy and meaty like guitar solos going on all the time, but really for me, as I mentioned, it's that grounding of emotion that I found within their music. And even though they're all instrumentals, it still had this really beautiful drive that was behind all their tracks. So now we come to their latest album of Subjects, and it's an interesting name and an interesting project, as this is the first album with a lyricist. Like, there's actual singing on this album, which hadn't been seen before. And what I particularly like about this project is each track has a different singer on it. And I really like that idea. I love that these guys are testing the waters, trying something new, and that's something that I can definitely say that is what this album is doing. It is probably one of their more ambitious projects, which is really saying something for this band. They're almost purposefully getting themselves out of their comfort zone on pretty much every one of these tracks. I was a little worried that because each track was featuring a different singer, that it wouldn't feel like a cohesive whole. It would feel like a bunch of these individual tracks that have just been collected. And on the one hand, it does feel a little bit like that because of the singers that we have on here, and I only knew going into this of two of the singers. I mean, I knew who all the singers were, but I only heard their singing from two of them. The first being Ross Jennings on the third track of Cloak and Dagger. He's the lead singer from Haken, as well as Joseph Sacurali. Anyway, he's the lead singer from Reign of Kino. And I did a pretty deep dive into Reign of Kino last year, and I really love their music. So I really was interested to see how each of these singers kind of folded into the band and brought their identities with them. Ross Jennings being on Cloak and Dagger is an interesting take, as his track is the first kind of scaled back track on the album. The first two tracks of Form and Finite, as well as Don't Mind Me, feature that same, not stereotypical, but that same kind of MO for a lot of Scale the Summit's tracks. We have a lot of very technical, fast guitar works, really chunky bass lines, with a lot of that crazy drum work that's being provided by the three main musicians. Chris Latchford on guitars, Killen Durity on bass, and Charlie Engine on drums. And these three boys definitely have that tight aspect towards them. And on top of that, there are a few guest individuals as well. Andy James has a guitar solo on the first track of Form and Finite, which he does a really good job at this. It feels, if you didn't know, like a continuation of Chris's usual guitar riffs and guitar works. But once you kind of sit down and listen to it for a number of times, you're like, oh, okay, I'm definitely seeing a different personality being brought into the fold. I also love Brandon Ewing's guitar solo on the fourth track of Disassemble, who has Eric Emme on vocals. I don't know who Eric Emme is. He is the lead singer of Sky Harbor, so I might check into that because I really enjoyed that track. Finally, rounding this off, I love Tommy Garvin's native flute on the 5th track of Jackhammer Ballet, featuring Joseph on that, and that's the Reign of Kino, and that kind of felt very natural in that kind of expression. So I've kind of talked around a lot in terms of like the music. As I mentioned, the 3rd track of Cloak and Daggers does a really good kind of a heartfelt track with Ross Jennings on vocal works. It feels like some of the smaller moments from the Heiken catalog, from say Affinity on like Red Giant, and some of the smaller tracks off of that. But the first 2 tracks of, as I mentioned, Form and Finite and Don't Mind Me, they're fine. As I mentioned, they utilize that same kind of MO. I do love the musical expressions that Garrett Garfield brings to that 2nd track, and unfortunately he did pass last year due to his struggle with depression, and I mean, depression is a mighty beast, so my heart goes out to him and all of the Garfield gang there. And the track itself does feel a little bit interchangeable with the 1st track, and that is one of the interesting aspects of this album, as more of like a negative aspect, is the album musically does fall into the Scale the Summit kind of paint by numbers music. Like, there's nothing way out of left field on this album to really scratch your head and be like, wow, that's a really interesting turn, even though they're experimenting with so many different things. As I mentioned, it is the most ambitious thing, but some of the tracks do start to get a little bit repetitive. Jackhammer Ballet does feel a little bit different with the Reign of Kino kind of essence being brought on there, but Disassemble and The Land of Nod, the 4th and 6th track, don't really do so much. I mean, I will appreciate that the 6th track has Courtney LaPlante, I think is LaPlante. She's from Spirit Box, and I love the introduction of a woman's vocals on here. It does separate this track from a lot of the other ones, so that there is a little bit of a clear variety on this. But the last 2 tracks of A New Way, featuring Randy Carroll from Forever's Never, and the last track of Space Cadet, featuring Ellie Cutting from Lettermaths. They are a little bit, as I mentioned, a little bit interchangeable in terms of tone, in terms of structure, and in terms of expression. But I still appreciate the band attempting something new. This does, at the end of the day, feel... And it's interesting. It feels like it's a collection of songs on an album rather than a full strung album, which is also why I feel like the actual title of Subjects is a very great nomiker for this, as it is more of just a subjects being kind of studied and played with, rather than like this unifying expression from start to finish. But the music itself does get a little bit repetitive at times, and I do feel like that's just, you're going to run into it with this style of music. But I still think that this is a great progression within their musical expression. I love their experimentations with the sounds and trying different things. It is a weird kind of contradictory album at times, but I still found myself digging into it and enjoying it. As with most Scale the Summit albums, I probably won't be returning to this all that often, even though this is one of my more favorite kind of instrumental, technical metal music. But yeah, I'm not going to be returning to it all that much. This one for me is a download. This is one that I would highly recommend downloading. It is one that I would check out if you're into this more technical style of like progressive metal music that has a little bit more of an emotional tint driving the force through it. And that's about it. So, what did you guys think of Subjects by Scale the Summit? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know by commenting down below. And if you like what you see and you want to help support me, consider donating to my Patreon. I've left that link down below as well. You get perks depending on what tier that you donate to. Every tier gets something. You get your name at the end of the credits. That's something that no matter what you donate, you'll always get. And that's about it for me. If you want to see more of me, got my podcast of Quid Pro Quo. You can find that on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. I've got my role-playing game channel that I hope to update update very soon. And yeah, I think that's about it for me. All right. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.